Hello, listeners and fellow book lovers. Welcome to The Book Snug, a bi-weekly conversational podcast about books and the reading life. My name is Julia.
And my name is Stephany.
We're a mother and daughter who love reading and talking about books, the ones we adore and the ones we don't. We're delighted you're here, so grab your favorite hot drink or ice-cold beverage and settle in for another cozy, bookish chat.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, Mom.
And hello, listeners and fellow readers.
Hello.
Before we get into our podcast proper, I just want to take care of a little bit of administrative business related to the podcast. First of all, we just want to say thank you so much for joining us every 2 weeks and allowing us to talk in your ears about books, because we love books and we love talking about them. We especially wanted to say thank you to the listener who rated us on Apple Podcasts. We thank you so much for the 5-star rating.
You the real MVP.
And we want to make a request to listeners who have been taking time to listen to what we have to say about books. If you feel comfortable and you're so inclined, if you would be willing to rate us and or review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that helps us to move up the list a little bit so that a few more like-minded people could find us. We're doing this podcast because it's fun and because we love to talk about books.
There's no ulterior motive.
Right. But it would be fun to bring more people into the group. We would really like to develop a community at some point around the Book Snug podcast. So if you, like I said, if you are feeling so inclined and you're enjoying our podcast, if you could take the time to rate us and review us, only if it's a good rating and a good review, we would really appreciate it.
But honestly, share your thoughts with them, please.
True.
We have strong skins. Thick skins.
Strong skins.
I don't know.
Also, if you have any helpful input or constructive criticism for us, we would appreciate that as well. We are newbie podcasters. A lot of times I feel like an imposter.
We just babies over here.
Right. We are baby podcasters. We have been struggling, especially getting the sound the way we want it. And we thank you for your patience with that. But we appreciate any input you have to give us. We have finally, I think, gotten our sound where we want it to be for the most part. And we have just been continually working with how we want the show layout to be. And we've decided to make one change already. And that is that we will not be talking about the books that we've recently read, that we're currently reading, and that we're looking forward to at the end of every episode. What we're deciding to do instead is at the end of every quarter, we're going to dedicate a whole episode to the books we've been reading, particularly the ones that we're really excited about and we want to share with other people. So for the first quarter, it will finish at the end of March. So our first quarterly review would be our first episode in April. And you can look forward to that. So from here on out, we won't be doing any kind of reviews at the end of each chapter. We'll just be doing it as a whole show 4 times a year. Yeah. I think that'll work better, don't you, Julia?
I agree. Yeah. I think it'll give us more time to read without pressure.
Right. And also more time to talk about the books we're really enjoying without trying to cram it in at the end of another show.
Yeah.
Also, by taking out our current reading discussions, it's going to shorten the length of our podcasts. And originally, we wanted our podcast to be between 30 and 40, 45 minutes in length.
We've done a stellar job of that.
We have been failing horribly.
Hence why we have a podcast. We like to talk about books.
And we really want to remain true to that vision right now. And we feel like taking that part of the show away and making it a separate thing, that we will be able to keep our shows within the length of time that we want to.
Right.
So that's all the administrative stuff I wanted to talk about. I just, again, want to say thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it so much. We're having so much fun. And just the fact that anybody else wants to listen to us talk about books is a joy for us.
And it's really cool. We don't creep, but we can see the stats every time that we post. And it's been really cool for us to see our consistent listeners.
Right.
So from Washington and Texas, I think Minnesota are the two that we see all the time, which is so fabulously exciting that there are people who routinely listen to us from other parts of the country. And then it's been really cool to see people from other parts of the world listen too.
Yeah. So that's all of our administrative behind the scenes business. What tea are you drinking tonight, Julia, as you take a sip from it?
So I recently purchased quote unquote self-care items on Etsy. So I ordered a really comfy sweatshirt that's coming and a new tea, partly because it just looked so pretty and I didn't care how it tasted. The container was so pretty that I just wanted it.
Yeah.
It's from a company on Etsy, as I said, called, it looks like it said plucked, but it has an umlaut over the U, so I don't know.
Probably plucked.
I'm not even going to try. But it's hand-picked tea from Latvia. And the one that I'm drinking is Blossom. So it's really light. I know, Mom, you said it kind of like a white wine, like a summer white wine.
Yeah. Like a Pinot Grigio.
Yeah. It just feels it's really calm for me. It's really simple. And I like it.
That's good. So. I mean, I hope you're not drinking something you're not enjoying.
No, and this is a tea that I am comfortable to steep the full recommended amount. I don't normally steep my teas for that long because it's too strong or too bitter for me. But this one is lovely, the full recommended time. What are you drinking, Mom?
Well, it's nighttime again. We don't usually record in the evening, but that's just how it worked out.
But we're both night owls, so it makes sense.
Well, it means I can't drink any caffeinated tea.
Right, and we all start to sound a little delirious, but we're definitely night owls.
I am drinking chocolate mint tea. I think it's Stash makes it. And I'm drinking it mostly because it's not caffeinated, but it is a nice tea for after supper because it feels like a dessert. It's very chocolatey flavored. And I like mint and chocolate together anyway. So I'm enjoying sipping, and I'm sure I will while we talk about books. While we're sitting here, we are recording on February 2nd. This episode will drop on February 8th. February 2nd is Groundhog Day.
And he saw his shadow.
They both did. We live in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. We live in an area that has 4 distinct seasons, and we are smack in the middle of the deep, dark winter.
But it's not deep, nor is it dark right now.
It has not been very wintry. I just saw on the internet the other day that January in this area has been the warmest it's been in decades.
Well, we had a couple of high 50s.
Low 60s, yeah.
Which is incredibly abnormal. But we've also had some pretty good snow flurry days, too.
Yeah, no accumulation of snow, but one day it snowed all day.
And it was very pretty to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The groundhogs around here are Puxatawney Phil and Octorara Orphe.
Try spelling both of those. Please, dear listener, if you're not from the area, try spelling it.
They are Native American words.
Yes.
But they both saw their shadows today. So we are going to have 6 more weeks of winter.
Please, I want snow.
Right.
I want snow. Lots of snow.
Historically, our biggest snowfalls are in February and March, but it's not looking very promising for February. It's really not going to get too much colder.
No.
But we'll see.
Yeah.
Meteorologists and weather forecasters have been known to be wrong before.
Yeah. But I will say that if it's not going to get cold and chilly and wintry, bring on a beautiful spring. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, in the winter time, well, how do you feel about winter? How do you feel about this winter?
When it's winter time, I want it to snow and I want it to be cold. Like how you think of like New England or upper New York or even some farther northern places. Like Canada or wherever where it's going to be cold and snowy, and I want that feeling of it's snowing outside. I can't physically go anywhere because I'm snowed in. I want it to be cold. I want to be able to go for walks while it's snowing. So when we get winters like this, it feels pointless. Let's move on to spring.
Right. And it gets to be depressing after a while because we've had days and days and days of overcast cloudiness. If we do have precipitation, it rains. And I hate rain in the winter. It is so dreary and depressing. If it's going to be cloudy, I want it to snow.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
I want my winters to be cold and snowy too. I like my seasons to be seasonal.
Absolutely. I agree.
And I don't hate winter.
No.
When March rolls around, I'll be ready for spring to come. But when we're in winter, I just prefer it to be like winter.
Yeah.
Yeah. How does winter affect your reading? Does it have any impact on how you read or how much you read or what types of books you're reading? Just tell me first, how does it impact your reading at all?
I mean, I think, so again, to kind of go back, like this is the first year I'm really looking at my reading habits. But I think notoriously winter, I think of like the winter break in high school, but then also in college where I have these long periods of time to not do anything. And of course, then I'm pummeling through books because what better way to spend a day of school?
Yeah.
As I have begun to work full time and take on adult life responsibilities, that has changed.
Right.
So winter, is definitely a time, beginning of January, where we think about our New Year's resolutions and our goals and everything. And I'm always reinvigorated with a sense of reading or the desire to get back into reading. So I don't know how to speak historically about what that looks like for me so far. I have definitely been reading more, and I don't know if I can point to the fact that it's winter because it's the new year, or just I had a lot of books I was excited about, or but I have definitely read a lot of books this year so far.
I think too, for me, January does feel like a time of renewal. I do get excited about reading again. I am not one of these people who thinks January 1st is just another day. It really does feel like a fresh start for me. And that carries over into my reading. For whatever reason, I just get excited again about the books I already own, and I want to read what I have. And I start looking at all the new books that are going to be coming out this year and what I should be getting excited for. So for me, I feel like in particular, January, I'm real hyped about reading again.
Yeah.
Now we're past January.
We are.
We are heading into February. But I feel like my momentum is pretty much staying high. Even though I feel like I am reading more in January, when I look back over the 10 years that I've kept track, my read rate, like the number of books I'm reading, is pretty average.
Sure.
I average about 7 to 9 books a month.
Yeah.
And that's what I averaged in January. So I'm not doing anything spectacular number-wise, but I think I'm just enjoying everything I'm reading more.
Well, and I think, in December, you mentioned too that your reading kind of tapers off towards the end.
Yeah, it does.
Either you're reading a lot more during your time off, or you're not reading as much because it's Christmas, still holiday time.
Stuff to do.
Yeah. So then maybe in comparison, it feels like you're reading a lot more versus not before.
That's true. I never even thought about that because my reading definitely tails off in November and December for a number of reasons. But maybe it's just because I'm getting back into my normal groove. It feels like I'm reading all these extra books.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you change at all when you read or where you read in the wintertime?
I think for me, winter is still very much yoga reading.
So comfort, cozy reading.
Yeah. The Scandinavian idea of comfort and cozy.
Yeah.
And that's something that I definitely start, in fall and continue through Christmas, and will probably continue through until the weather is nice enough to start going on picnics. And then that's
being outside.
Right. And that's when it'll change for me. Spring and summer, I do a lot of my reading outside because that's a very good, quick, enjoyable way to get some vitamin D, sun, get the sun,
get some vitamin sun.
But I think definitely these cooler months is when I'm doing the most inside, cozy blanket or in bed right before bed.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, I think, I don't want to say it's when I do my longest reading. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe it's when I do my most meditative reading. So it's the reading that I ponder a little bit more. Maybe I read my darker subject. So then maybe I feel like I'm able to give it more time and more thought versus like if I'm reading at the beach, I might read 4 or 5 books in the week that we're at the beach, which is a different reading feel for me than reading in the middle of January, February.
Yeah. I know for me in the winter, I have 2 places I do the majority. Well, actually 3 places I do the majority of my reading. I have a very comfortable, old, worn, settled in leather chair by our gas fireplace. And I love to read there in the evenings. I do a lot of reading in bed at night as well. And then I also love a hot tub in the winter. And we redid our bathroom several years ago, but when we did that, we put a big soaking tub in, not a jacuzzi or anything, just a big soaking tub, and I spend a lot of time in there in the winter. I don't read physical books in the tub though, because I can't stand when they get all steamy and yeah, I love my books too much for that. But I do like to read from my nook, or I will listen to a book when I'm in the tub if I'm feeling really tired and I don't want to use my eyeballs.
Yeah, I told Ben that if we ever build our house, I'm absolutely getting a soaking tub, no questions asked. Hands down. Hands down.
It's one of the things that I just love, about our house. But I only do that in the winter. I do not get in the tub in the spring or summer. I do get in it in the fall, not as much as the winter though. Do you feel like you read different types of books in the winter?
Yeah, I mean, again, historically, I can't really speak too much, but this year I've discovered that all of my books, minus 2 that I've interjected here in the middle, but the books that I had originally planned for winter all had dark covers, like so black or dark navy, or I think those are the 2 colors.
That's so interesting. Do you think the covers are just reflecting the feel or the content of the book?
I think now I can say yes, because the past couple of books that I've read have all either had to do, so for example, I just finished Atlas 6, which I would kind of maybe classify as dark academia a little bit. And then before that it was Night Circus, which is kind of dark and moody, and then Devil in the White City. And then the very first one I read was a Book of Night, which has to do with shadow magic. So I think it kind of, there's a very similar theme through all of those of not, I don't want to say darkness as in like evilness, but just, like moodiness, kind of darker undercurrents. And then I have upcoming a book about books and dark magic, and then myths and legends. So I think there's meditative stuff too, of thinking about books that pull me in to think about them a little bit more, but then also books about darker things, more fringe topics, or like Devil in the White City, maybe darker actual topics like murder or
fiction.
Things like that. But again, I don't know historically what that's looked like, or if this is a pattern that will continue into the future.
It sounds like you've listed a lot of fantasy. It sounds like maybe fantasy might be a go-to theme for you in the wintertime.
I think fantasy is a go-to in general, but I also know when I have hit my limits on fantasy. So I'm at a point where I need not a palate cleanser, but I've had a lot of the same fantasy back to back that I can sense it changing how I'm thinking about things. So I need to put full stop, breathe a second, and then continue with my reading.
I read a lot of fantasy in the winter. I also read a lot of nonfiction. And I like mysteries in the wintertime. I read mysteries throughout the year, but I seem to really crave them the 3 months of winter. And when we talk about winter, I should say this. So we're really talking about January, February, and March.
And for me, I'm stopping in the middle of March. Because April and May is a very short spring season, because I do summer, June, July, and August. So I will be done the middle of March, but it's still, March is included in our winter discussions.
The reason we're not including December is because my December reading is completely
Christmas.
separate.
It's Christmas.
I read a lot of Christmas themed books. I did, especially this past year. So that's kind of a whole separate thing. This is really January, February, and March.
Yeah.
I have kept track, as I've said numerous times, of my reading on Goodreads for at least 10 years. So I was curious and I went back and looked through my reading habits for January, February, and March, and definitely fantasy, nonfiction, and mystery rose to the top. Mystery by far is my number one choice. And the fantasies that I choose tend to be fantasies more along the line of Half a Soul. I forget who wrote that book, but they're just light. A lot of times they have a little bit of romance mixed in. They might be fairy tales. So I find that a lot of my fantasy in the wintertime falls along those lines. It's interesting.
Right, because that's what I want to read in the spring.
Right.
So that's so odd.
But I can honestly say that I've never purposely thought it through. And I just finished reading a 5-star fantasy that is perfect for winter.
Yeah.
That we're going to have to wait till April until I can talk about it. But it was wonderful. And the one thing I am going to say is it's the first in a series. So there's another one coming out next year around this time. So I'm definitely a fantasy reader.
Is that the encyclopedia?
Yes. Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett.
Yes, that's on my,
my
list.
If you're going to read it, you need to listen to it.
Okay.
For one thing, she's English, but her partner is Irish. And just to hear the accents and her academic colleague, his name is Wendell Bambleby. I loved him. Yeah. I absolutely loved him. And just to hear his accent when he talks is spectacular.
Oh, man. Okay.
But it was just, I didn't intend to talk about it, but we'll talk about it. It was just the perfect fantasy story for me for this time of year. And it takes place in a Nordic community in the winter. So it's snowy and cold and there are fae and it's just wonderful.
I'm so here
it's
for it.
It's so well written.
Yeah.
I told my mom about it and she gave it 5 stars. My sister happened to be in on the text messaging that we were doing and she picked it up and read it through before I even finished and gave it 5 stars. So it's been a hit in our family. Yeah.
Okay, now I have to listen to it now, I guess.
Anyway, we've gotten totally off track.
Not really. We're talking about books.
That's true. But really, what we wanted to focus more on in this chapter is the fact that you and I both like to read nonfiction this time of year.
I think for me, this time more than any other time of year.
Yeah. And I think that's true for me. I just feel like I have the patience to really dive into some heavier nonfiction books.
Well, and I think for me, with it being the new year still, I'm more willing to explore new topics and I'm more open to different, maybe not genres, but different topics in my books. Whereas like come the middle of summer, I'm not as exploratory.
No, in the summer I went light, fluffy romances. Yeah.
I mean, I will buy new books, but I'm not going to buy nonfiction is probably not going to pop up anywhere.
Right. What we're going to do today is instead of talking about books we've already read, we thought we would bring some books that we're looking forward to reading to the show. Some of the things that are interesting us right now, you'll get listeners, you'll get an idea of some of the types of nonfiction books that we like. And maybe we'll bring up a book that you might be interested in or that you've already read. And if you've already read it, you can let us know if it's worthwhile or not.
Yeah.
What is one type of nonfiction book, Julia, that you really like to read?
So I am totally cheating with this first one because there's not a lot of reading involved. And I think we're calling these human interest. So I'm a fan of like Brandon Stanton, who does the Humans of New York online. And I also follow, I will forever butcher her name, Mihaela Noroc, is I think how it's spelled.
Okay.
I'm totally sure that that's not how you say it, but she did the Atlas of Beauty. And these are collections of photographs about different people. So Brandon Stanton does his, walking around New York City, taking pictures of people and asking them different questions that then you get to know about them. And then the Atlas of Beauty, Mihaela has gone around the world taking pictures of women and sharing some of their stories. And so it's these beautiful photo books, which if I don't have the mental ability to like read anything, but I want to look through, these are really great to just curl up and look through. I know that Brandon Stanton is coming out or has a new one titled Humans, which I won. It's on my list. And I believe Mihaela is working on a new one. But I wanted to bring these up because I have a lot of friends who ask me quite regularly, I'm not a reader, what should I read? And so I always kind of recommend these to people because it kind of gets you into reading a little bit, because you're reading these really cool parts of people's lives or getting to know different people without reading a story. And the pictures are beautiful to look at.
And it's not so overwhelming because there's not tons of text. There are pictures to look at too.
Right.
Yeah, it's almost like a picture book for adults, really.
Yeah. If you have never heard of the Atlas of Beauty, I think most people have heard of Humans of New York in some capacity. If you have never heard of Atlas of Beauty, I highly suggest you look it up. It is a captivating book to look through with some absolutely just breathtaking images. And I think Mihaela has just a really interesting desire to just take photographs of women around the world and ask them about their stories and get to know them. And then she'll even share them online too. So it's like building this wonderful community of people. So I highly recommend those if you're not a reader, but want to read something this winter.
Is it all women?
Yes. Atlas of Beauty is all women. Humans of New York and Humans is anyone.
Everyone.
Yes. Okay. What is your first one, Mom?
My first category of nonfiction book that I really enjoy reading are books that take scientific research and apply it to some part of our everyday life. And a couple of books that I'm pretty sure that I would really enjoy reading are related to that. So the first book is called Digital Body Language: How to Build Trust and Connection No Matter the Distance.
Ooh.
And this book talks about how when we communicate with people face to face, we use a ton of nonverbal body language. But when you're texting someone, when you're emailing them, when you are communicating digitally, all of that gets taken away. And the focus of this book is how to really get whatever you're saying across to the person in such a way that they understand everything you mean, including how you would use body language to express yourself. And this is a quote from the book. It says, "Reading carefully is the new listening. Writing clearly is the new empathy." And she gives tons of examples of how to communicate effectively online, how to get your message across in a way that people understand that you care about them. The reason that this book interests me is I am a teacher and I teach online. Almost half my classes are at least blended or completely virtual. And so I'm always looking for ways to communicate well with my students so that they know I'm not just this nebulous presence in the background not doing anything, that I am actively involved in their learning experience and that I care that they're successful.
You mean specifically your online classes?
Yeah, specifically my online classes, because I can express that very well when I'm face to face with my students. So that's one book that interests me. And then the other one, and the reason this book caught my attention is because on the cover is a picture of this pink knitted hat that looks like a brain.
Ooh.
And I just thought, what is this book about? It's called The Neuroscience of Body Language: The Astonishing Science Behind How Everyday Hobbies Help Us Relax. It is by Stan Rodski. And what he does is he takes all this research that's been done on mindfulness and repetitive mindful actions and how they impact us positively. And he associates that with hobbies, any type of hobby that has a repetitive motion. And I'm going to say crochet, knitting, cross stitch, because those are the things I'm most familiar with. Sure. But it can be any hobby like that. And how that relaxation and that mindfulness has positive impacts on our life beyond the hobbies. That's what I'm taking from the description. It could be something totally different, but it just sounded interesting to me. And the knitted brain hat was just cool. So I definitely love books that take science and cross-reference it to our regular lives. I like the research component and then how it impacts how we're living. And also if it can give us like actionable steps to get the benefits, I'm even happier about that.
I mean, that as you're talking, I was reminded of Dr. Oliver Sacks, who wrote the books on, now he's a psychologist and passed several years ago, but he wrote a book on hallucinations, which was really interesting, and how kind of the things that you were talking about kind of all played together. But the one that I was the most excited about was he wrote one called musicophilia, which is how the brain works with music, how some people can have a concussion and are suddenly musical savants, or how music impacts dementia.
Yeah.
So just some of the things that I was thinking about where you were talking about that, and the brain is so fascinating.
It is. And I love books like that.
Yeah.
I just recently DNF'd a book called Beginners. And forgive me, I can't remember the name of the author. I think his last name is Wolf, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, I started reading it because I thought it was going to be something like these other books where it talks about what happens to the brain when you are learning something new, when you are starting from scratch, because I was interested in my experience starting this podcast. It's not what the book ended up being. It ended up being somebody who was just going to try a whole bunch of things and then talk about his experience. Okay. So it was more like memoir, not really.
So kind of like Super Size Me, the movie, without being Super Size Me.
Exactly. Okay. And it was fine. It was absolutely fine. It just wasn't what I wanted. So I stopped reading it.
Okay.
But those are just the kind of books that I really, really enjoy reading. It's one type of book anyway.
Yeah.
Are there any other nonfiction books that you enjoy? Genres or categories or?
Well, the other one that I was going to talk about, I mentioned that I feel the need to take a pause on my fiction, and these books I'm about to talk about, I had not initially planned on reading them. I am very, very ahead in reading my winter TBR list. I have read a couple of books back to back that had to deal with tarot cards and magic like that, and I could just feel myself recognizing that it was time to like pause on fiction for a second. And with some of the current political conversations that are happening and it being Black History Month, I decided this would be, you know what, if I need a break, instead of not reading, why don't I read some of these books that I have on my shelves that match these conversations a little bit? So even if I'm not paying attention to the news, I'm being sensitive in my reading. And these are, I don't want to give them a specific category other than I'm choosing to read them in February, which is Black History Month. So the first one is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I believe is an award-winning author. The second one is I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. And these are short little books. I'll be able to read them in a day maybe. So not only do they fit with my meditative theme of winter, of taking the time to think about what I'm reading, but I think that they're important books to read anyway if you want to be informed about some of the conversations that are going on. And I mean, everything aside, I started reading Between the World and Me when I first bought it, and the writing is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So I kind of felt like I needed to mention that because these books, because I think sometimes, at least for me, I didn't know where to start with these conversations. And so just kind of reading these books has been really helpful. So
gives you a different perspective than your own.
Yeah. And I'm all for learning about things that I can never experience, because it opens up my my mind and my heart to compassion and grace that I might not have otherwise experienced.
Right. It helps you to become a more empathetic
Yeah.
person.
Do you have any others, Mom?
Oh, I read a ton of nonfiction, and I read from a lot of different areas. But I thought I would talk about 2 other areas that I really like to read from. I like nonfiction that is narrative and historically based. So currently I am reading Endurance. It's about Shackleton crossing the Antarctic, the continent of Antarctica. I've just started it. I'm listening to it on Audible. I am having a hard time pulling authors out of my head. I think it's Alan Lansing or Lansky. Well, I don't know. It will be in the show notes. Okay. And I apologize that I didn't check before we got started. But it is a historical account of what happened to these men. They got stuck in an ice floe. Their boat got crushed. They had to take their sleds across the continent. And
can't even imagine.
It could be a very dry retelling, but the author just makes it seem like this adventure story, and it's all the survival and the way the men loved and took care of each other. So I'm looking forward to that. And I found another book that's also historical that I think would be really interesting. And it's called Hell's Half Acre, The Untold Story of the Benders, a Serial Killer Family on the American Frontier.
Okay.
It's by Susan Jonusa. And it is about this family who lived in postbellum America who killed many, many people and got away with it. And then they disappeared.
My word.
Yeah. So it just, I think it would be fascinating. Now, it's probably going to border on a little too graphic for me. I have a feeling. But I'm just always fascinated by the way that people got away with things. It doesn't happen quite as much now because of all of the ways we have to track people, like DNA and fingerprints, and we understand the life cycle of bugs, and we can just do all these things to help us find killers.
Yeah.
But in the late 1800s.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and I was just watching something about the awful murders that happened in Iowa, the 4 college students.
Yes.
But they tracked the guy because of Ring video cameras on people's front doors.
Right.
So it's crazy how far we've come. But you're right. At that time, people just disappeared because there was nothing.
There was no. Yeah. How did you tie people to?
Yeah.
I mean, if the family had still been living in the farmhouse, yeah.
Sure.
But they just up and left, and yeah. So I thought that sounded really interesting. And then the other type of book that I love reading has to do with investigating creativity. I think that one of the ways that we most profoundly reflect the image of God is in the fact that we have creative capacity. And I just really enjoy reading books that talk about being creative, how to nurture your creativity. I like reading from different people who have been successful in their creative fields. And I found a book, and this book is coming out. It's not even out yet, I don't think. And it's called The Creative Act, A Way of Being. It's written by Rick Rubin. His area of specialty is music. I think it's producing music. But this book is not just about making music. It's about the creative experience. So I just think it sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
I almost every year read at least one book, usually more than that, based on creativity. Most of the books that I like reading have to do with writing, being creative as a writer, or photography, and sometimes art. But this just sounded really, really good. So I think I might be picking this one up when it comes out. But that's it. I mean, those are just some of the nonfiction books. And that, I mean, we talked about a wide variety of nonfiction, and I barely scratched the surface of the stuff I like.
Yeah.
Some of the other books I think would be fun to read. I found one that's called Butts, A Backstory. And it is exactly what you think it is. It is about the cultural history of behinds.
Interesting.
Of derrieres.
What would possess somebody to write us? Like, what?
I'd
be so curious to the inspiration behind that.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, it just sounds funny.
Yeah, it does.
And then Alan Rickman's diaries have been published.
So much issue.
Really?
Did you hear about that?
No.
Because apparently in it he says that he thought Emma Watson couldn't act. So there was a lot of stuff that came out.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. Oh, Mom, it caused so much.
Oh, where was I?
I
well,
don't
it
know.
doesn't matter because have you seen it? No. He has all kinds of sketches, watercolor paintings, and
And I think the issues where people they were just shocked that was in it, but the people that knew him were like, he's not being mean, he's being who he was, which was truthful. And
well, it's his personal diaries. He never wrote them thinking that somebody was going to publish them. He was writing his diaries.
Yeah.
And he was an incredible actor.
Yeah.
He is entitled to his opinions.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
that's something else that I would be interested in reading.
Oh, me
so
too.
I mean, I could go on and on. Nonfiction, there's a wealth of interesting things to read. And we did not even touch on faith-based nonfiction.
No.
We're going to do that in April. We're going to dedicate a whole chapter to faith-based nonfiction.
Yeah,
so.
and I didn't talk about, I have so many memoirs, and not memoirs or autobiographies, but books about people's experiences. Maybe those are memoirs.
Those are memoir.
But like A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Beah, or I Am Malala, or even Brain on Fire by Susan Cahalan.
Yes.
Some of these really spectacular books, or even Laughing at My Nightmare by Shane Burkall. Like I didn't include any of those. So there's still a lot that I could talk about. But I think this is a good toe dipper, our intro into our nonfiction.
Into nonfiction. And we didn't even touch on nonfiction that we've read and really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Well, you did.
I just
did
named
on
a
some
few.
of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we did that little topic justice.
I hope so.
And I hope maybe our listeners have found a book or two that they think they might like to pick up.
Yeah. Or if you have read any of the ones we talked about already.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy them?
Yeah. Were they good?
Yeah. Are they worth our winter reading time?
Or if you have a nonfiction book that you would like to recommend, I am always looking for recommendations to add to my never-ending to-be-read list.
Yeah. Well, as we said, thank you so much for listening, and we hope that your winter reading or summer reading, whenever you're choosing to listen to this.
Well, or where you live, if you live in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere.
We hope that your reading is lovely and enjoyable and inspiring, and you're cozy while you're reading.
Yes.
And that your book is enjoyable. May your book always be enjoyable.
Yeah.
So our next podcast, which will drop at its regular time in its regular scheduled week, is going to be another conversational kind of podcast where we're going to be talking about our rules for reading. So just not nonsensical, but just kind of lighthearted, talking about what do we need to read, or what are our rules,
our do's and don'ts.
Yeah,
that applies to us, to nobody else.
Yeah,
these are personal and specific rules for reading.
So if you're curious about how anal we are about our reading, or how not anal we are about our reading, or how we're going to talk about that topic, join us next podcast.
Thanks so much for spending part of your day with us. We'd love for you to continue today's conversation at the Booksnug_podcast on Instagram and at the Booksnug Podcast on Facebook. All of our episodes can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at our website, thebooksnugpodcast.buzzsprout.com, where show notes for every episode can be found. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at thebooksnugpodcast@gmail.com.
As C.S. Lewis, one of our favorite authors, famously said, "You can never have a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me," and we wholeheartedly agree.